in Doha, Qatar, during a youth soccer match. Each time the Yemenis scored a goal, they did the Bouthania.
The settlers were throwing garbage out their windows, onto the street, which is the market in the old city of Hebron, and so they had to put up mesh on top of the pathways in the market to keep.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on over 30 cable stations from Vermont to New York City and points west. Today, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, the University of New Haven, Palestine, and if there's time, some words about Puerto Rico. We start with the grim news: 2 assassinations of Syrians in Turkey. Turkish police confirm that Arabe Barakat, a Syrian dissident, and her daughter Hala Barakat, who is a journalist and editor at Orient News, were found dead in their apartment in Istanbul. Hala Barakat is also an American citizen. Regime murders outside of Syria are a constant worry. The acclaimed film City of Ghosts, which talks about Raqqa, and the great group Raqqa is being slaughtered silently, deals with the aftermath of one such assassination in Turkey. Hopefully people will frequent the Orient News as a way of defying the murderers and foiling their attempt to silence the journalists at that website. If you saw Democracy Now! On September 22nd, you saw this.
The settlers were throwing garbage out their windows, onto the street, which is the market in the old city of Hebron, and so they had to put up mesh on top of the pathways in the market to keep.
Image of 5-year-old Bouthania, a Yemeni girl whose parents and brothers and sisters were all killed by a Saudi bombardment. An expert for Amnesty International confirmed the obvious: it was an American bomb. The picture of the little girl trying to open one of her eyes went viral in Arab countries. A Yemeni blogger imitated it in a selfie, and many others did the same. In Doha, Qatar, during a youth soccer match, each time the Yemenis scored a goal, they did the Bouthania. It's a sign of protest and solidarity, and we should do it here in protest of Trump's collaboration in this Saudi war. This is my Bouthania. Now to Connecticut. Our parent group, the Middle East Crisis Committee, is part of the U.S. coalition to end the U.S.-Saudi alliance. The coalition recently was outraged to learn that the University of New Haven has set up a program to share its advanced crime fighting and forensic techniques with the King Fahd Security College of Saudi Arabia. The UNH's Henry C. Lee College is helping to set up a 4-year program at the Saudi College. Now, you might know that Saudi Arabia is an absolute monarchy. Women are not allowed to drive, not allowed to do much of anything outside the home without a male guardian. Imaginary crimes such as witchcraft, apostasy, and homosexuality can get a person the death penalty. Speaking out for democratic rights or religious practices not mandated by the government can get 1,000 lashes or even worse. And there is that matter of the Saudi invasion of Yemen. Thousands of people dead and cholera disease rates approaching 700,000. As for King Fahd Security College, Police in Saudi Arabia are known to sometimes torture, and all the police in Saudi Arabia are graduates of that college. What are UNH professors doing with them? Now, on September 21st, a group of nearly 50 academics, activists, professionals, and others from around the country sent a letter to President Stephen Kaplan of UNH and the UNH Board of Governors asking that they immediately end their collaboration with Saudi Arabia. The university responded with a statement to the press in which they said that the program merely enhances cross-cultural dialogue and enhances joint efforts to prevent terrorism and radicalism. Sounds nice, sounds harmless. But just 1 week after Amnesty International has warned that a young Saudi faces imminent execution at any time for his role in anti-government protest, the real question is, who will UNH be helping the Saudi government to arrest? There's a petition for the public to sign about this matter, asking for an end to this UNH-Saudi cooperation. Go to the website saudius.org and please consider signing. I'd like to mention a piece on Korea that I wrote for peacenews.org. Its title is Korea, Don't Let Trump Normalize Genocide. Its title is self-explanatory. It includes some practical suggestions on how we can get out of this cycle of war threats and the threat of nuclear war. We start our program by pointing out we broadcast on over 30 cable stations from Vermont to New York City. Actually, there's more in New Jersey and in Indiana. And we'd like to point out that with streaming TV, you could see our show on the big TVs with services like Roku and Amazon and Google. All you have to do is go to the YouTube channel, choose that, and then go to search and enter Struggle Video Media. That's the name of our channel. Choose our logo, and you'll get to a line of our most recent uploads. And that's where our shows will be. Please tell your friends. Incidentally, we've been on weekly since 2003. This is show 711, a lucky show. May you all have great luck today. And now the conclusion of our interview with 3 Jewish Voice for Peace activists who went on a bicycle tour in the West Bank of Palestine. Maybe a little more about the Banksy Hotel. I mean, Banksy, for those who don't know, is a very important artist who is unknown. There are no images of his face, and he wants it to be that way. And he does, well, it's certainly not graffiti. It's a heck of a lot more. I mean, it's brilliant satirical art in a lot of different areas, but often about Palestine. So what are some of the things in this ironic hotel?
The hotel is supposed to be modeled after the Waldorf, so it's pristine and like chandeliers and woodworking, but all the artwork on the walls is total cognitive dissonance, because you think you're looking at something pretty, and when you walk closer to it, you realize it's about death and destruction and demolition and just a lot of the reality of what the Palestinians live with. But what I was struck with Banksy's art is that it's very hopeful in a lot of ways. It's very, it has spirit and courage, and it's inspiring about the essence of resistance.
I remember one famous one is where a checkpoint, so to speak, a soldier being searched by a little girl.
Yeah. Right.
He has a lot of images that are actually painted on the wall and then reproduced other places that basically they're images of the wall being held back by a curtain or a hole through the wall and a beautiful landscape on the other side. So it's always the image of the wall not being at the barrier.
And I'm sorry.
No, that things can grow and live despite this, that Israel is trying to deny access and deny life. Banksy's filled with images of life.
And there had been some controversy. Some complained that he was taking advantage of the Palestinians. But did you come across Palestinians who were negative about the hotel?
No, I don't. No, nothing like that.
It's built for tourists. I think it's part of a...
And you could actually stay in that hotel?
Yeah, they have rooms. Yeah. We did not as a group, but...
You can buy a pricey cappuccino and a pricey piece of cake there, which we did do.
Yeah, we had afternoon tea.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. I'm sorry.
One of the other things about Bethlehem and Jericho and that whole area is the enormous number of Christian holy sites that are there, and how significant those are, and how little tourism they actually get. I think as a result of the occupation and the difficulties that the Israelis put, and to see people being baptized in the Jordan River and just sort of, and that parking lot is half empty. I mean, it's not what you would think. I'm a Christian person, and I would expect that the Christian holy sites would be a primary destination, and somehow it's been accepted that we don't go to those places, or not very many. Maybe more Africans and Latin Americans realize that they're there than the American Christian community are basically, I mean, when they go to Israel, they're being Christian Zionists, and so they're honoring the Jewish holy sites, which just, I mean, I don't know that those people even go to the West Bank to see the holy sites that are the beginning of their own tradition.
Well, it's mostly Bethlehem.
Well, then on to Hebron and finishing up in Jerusalem. So Hebron's a curious city. In one of the peace agreements, Arafat made a so-called temporary agreement that a section of the city where Jewish settlers had come in would be theirs for a while, and it's a very odd situation. So what did you see in Hebron?
Hebron was the hardest city for me personally. It seemed the most dark. So many streets were deserted with walled up businesses. People weren't able to sell their wares anymore, so there was no income coming in. So there seemed to be so much more poverty. There was a lot of children on the streets begging, which was the only city that I instant desperation of wanting us to buy from them. And then there was one merchant that was open right across from the Israeli Defense Security Guard post, and he and his family owned the shop, invited us for coffee and tea, and shared stories of how hard it is to live there and survive there. And they also were very hospitable, and it's amazing how many Palestinians speak perfect English. That just makes me so ashamed that English is the only language I'm able to converse in, and they're just, very educated people.
Now, when I was there 10 years ago, I remember the mesh over certain streets. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, so Hebron is different from other cities in the West Bank in the sense that in other parts of the West Bank, the settlements are geographically separate from the Palestinian villages and cities. In Hebron, for the reasons that Ellen was getting at, the settlement is actually in the middle of the city. And so it's very very together, and the settlers were throwing garbage out their windows, onto the street, which is the market in the old city of Hebron, and so they had to put up mesh on top of the pathways in the market to keep the garbage from coming through. Of course, it still comes through to some degree, so it's just a disgusting situation, and that's really just a part of it. The other part of it is that the people who live there, Palestinians who live there, are just constantly harassed by the settlers, by the military there. I forget what the ratio of military to actual settlers is. Maybe you know, Stan, but it's more than 1 to 1. There's more than one soldier there for every settler.
And the settlers are trying.
I think it's six settlers, or 5 for 4, or something like that, for each settler who's one soldier for each settler who's there. Yeah.
And
are always built on high. They're always built higher than where the Palestinian villages are, for so-called settlement safety. But they're stolen land. They belong to the Palestinians. They take the access to their water. They force the Palestinians to then buy back their own water from streams that were diverted by the settlers. And the settlers also tend often to be religious, very highly religious, and in their fanaticism seem just so filled with hate, and not there to coexist at all or live side by side, but really feel like they want total power and control.
And they're constantly trying to seize this house or that house.
They actually just invade the house, and they'll hang an Israeli flag on it. And once they've done that, the Palestinian family doesn't have any good legal recourse because there's no place that they can contest that. There's also these sort of administrative actions, like right before we got there by a few weeks, they had changed all of the signs, which were formerly in Hebrew and Arabic and English, so that they're Hebrew and English only. So that in this Arab city, it's now
like 100,000 people or something.
Right. So, but in this downtown area, no Arabic on the signs, which is an occupation of your mind in addition to the physical.
And there's also in that area is a very important religious site, Cave of the Patriarchs, Ibrahimi Mosque, and I understand you went inside?
Yeah. Yeah, we were inside, and actually, ordinarily there are separate parts of the Tomb of the Patriarchs. One part that Muslims can go into, one part that Jews can go into. Christians are allowed to go into either side, but for some reason I'm not really sure why this happened, but we were able to go into the Muslim side, even though we were a group that had both Christians and Sikhs and Muslims and Jews. We went into the Muslim side, which I was really very pleased to be able to do, because the last time I had been there I could only go into the Jewish side, and it was really remarkable to see it.
We were also told that the disrespect of when the Jews or Israelis come to pray there, they refuse to take off their shoes and walk on the holy rugs that the Muslims kneel and pray on, and they walk with their shoes. So there's just they're trying to share one area of prayer that's sacred to both faiths, and they're not. The Jews just don't seem to be respecting.
And of course, a little over 20 years ago, there was a horrible massacre in the mosque. An American-born man comes in and I think killed 29 people. I believe that's when most of this division happened. Before that, it was much more amicable. And let's end with Jerusalem and the. All right, sure.
One more thing about Hebron. Do you want to talk about the Passover, the Seder that we had?
The day we were in Hebron was the first night of Passover, and we decided, mostly Shelly and Ellen decided that it was important to have a Seder, and then the sort of plan got diminished slightly, so because there was so many people who had no idea what that was, and they were tired and wanted to just have dinner. Ellen led a beautiful overview of the Seder. and what it means, and was engaged in conversation with the people for the rest of the night and probably the rest of the trip about the significance of Passover and what it means. And Shelly read a passage. I have the passage if you want to read it.
Could not find any matzahs anywhere because
You could not find any matzahs in the Holy Land. This is a first.
yes, not in Palestine, in the cities we were, and the Jewish shops were all closed because of the start of the holiday. They closed very early to prepare, so it was just it was funny trying to explain these dry, flat matzahs because all there was pita bread everywhere on the table, and no matzahs. But, It was just a beautiful experience to be with such an international interfaith group of caring people who were interested in trying to make the world a more just and beautiful place.
And then to Jerusalem and the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. I saw some pictures you took of it. So in our final moments, what are some reflections about the trip up there? Of course, this is before the big controversy in the summer.
It was welcoming. We had to go through a checkpoint that's controlled by Israeli soldiers. We were told not to say we were Jewish because if we were Jewish, we wouldn't be able to go into the mosque. So there's big signs telling us to tell your religious faith. And I'm practicing, and when it comes my turn, I almost blew it. But we were allowed to wander around, and only people who are Muslim can enter the mosque itself. But the plaza or the square that it's on is just beautiful, and the outside is beautiful, and it's very peaceful and welcoming. And it's just, while we were there wasn't the conflict right at that site.
And we have to say that the idea of asking people religion and keeping Jews away is not totally crazy or just bigoted, because there is a important section of Israeli Jews who want to take this land and build a third temple or whatever.
There is a lot of variation in the views of the Jews in Jerusalem, and it was Passover, and so everybody's excitement level was high. And there were these spectacular bagels, bigger than anything I had ever imagined, that were for sale one day, and then we read the next day that the bagel sellers had been arrested for selling leavened bread on Passover in the old city. And it's a mixed community. I mean, obviously people were buying the bagels, weren't concerned about whether or not it was okay to have leavened bread on Passover. It's just every level.
Another first, arrested for selling bagels in Israel. Okay.
Also Easter week. It was good. We were there for this Palm Sunday, and we were heading toward Good Friday and Easter. So it felt like an incredibly special time to be there, but you definitely felt like society is being controlled by the Israeli government, even though all religions are represented.
As we close, any last reflections? Any problem getting out with the searches? I mean, some people, they do strip searches, but
no, we didn't have any problems like that. The one of the men in our group was Muslim, and he, on the way in, was stopped and questioned and brought to a separate room and for quite a while, but eventually he was allowed to get in.
I just want to say they provide these bike tours twice a year, and if anyone's interested, it's a beautiful experience. Just rereading the journal I kept makes me want to go again.
And the website?
There's a website that's bikepalestine.org, but also the Siraj Center, SIRAJ. They do hiking as well as biking tours, and they're, a Palestinian organization, and they're really wonderful at facilitating and open to lots more Europeans than Americans take these trips, but they're great.
And I'd like to give a shout out to the group that we were riding with. We've stayed in touch with each other, and everybody is has gone on with their lives, but are blending this experience that they had into their lives in various ways, and it's just wonderful to see that.
Well, thank you for speaking with me.
Thank you, Stan.
Before we leave Palestinian issues, this photo of the staff of the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights saluting Rasmia Oda, who has been forced to leave the United States after an immigration prosecution. Oda had been convicted of a murder charge in Israel and had served decades in prison. She said that she was convicted only because of her confession and has maintained for years that that came about only after horrific and degrading torture. As we record, 70,000 people in Puerto Rico are told to leave their homes because of an imminent threat that a dam will fall. Here's a photo from a recent Puerto Rican Day parade in Chicopee, Massachusetts. The banner refers to a Obama Promesa law that takes away even more power from the people on the island and hands it to those who will make Puerto Rico even more friendly for the banks and corporations. What an outrage. Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens, and one hurricane can knock out 100% of the power on the island. Hurricanes go across the British possession of Bermuda, but buildings there are built to withstand 200-mile-an-hour winds. But we don't have the money for that. We have to feed the Pentagon. It's an utter disgrace. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.